Welcome, folks. I want to tell you a saga of what used to be a great newspaper. There was a family called the Ox family. They owned the Chattanooga Times, and they moved from Chattanooga to New York City back in the 19th century, and they married with a family known as the Sulzbergers, and they bought the New York Times. And they made it into the greatest newspaper in America. It was the paper of record. So, for example, the TV news people, before they got underway, they would read the Times, they'd pick out the stories they wanted to do, then they would amplify them for TV that night. So what happened? There was a guy named Punch Sulzberger who had been a Marine veteran. He was a real fine person. And he ran the show, did a good job. They had some breaks. I had a little counterpoint with their editor named Keller, and I questioned his journalistic credentials. But nevertheless, Punch's son took over the New York Times. He is a dyed-in-the-wool liberal, very pro-homosexual, and the Times is no longer is a respected newspaper. It is a propaganda sheet. The editorials, the news has all blurred together. Instead of being the great paper of record for America, it's just become a left-wing rag. Now, it's unprecedented. They would print an op-ed by a so-called anonymous senior official. And I was talking to Terry, and we suspect the possibility that the Times actually made up that editorial because it isn't attributed to anybody, but it's the sorriest example of left-wing journalism I think that we have seen in America. And the writer claims those around the president are trying to frustrate his agenda, but to have anybody who would take a job, earn a salary, supposedly support the agenda of his boss, and turn against him in such a fashion, that is the worst kind of betrayal, and it's the kind of person that no business would possibly want to hire. Well, that's the situation that Trump is finding himself in, and I don't buy it. You talk about fake news, it's really disgusting. And to think the demise of a great newspaper, this was a great newspaper. It's not great anymore. It's nothing but a left-wing rag.
Well, as you can imagine, Trump and most of the country would like to know who wrote that piece, if someone did. The president is also tweeting the deep state and the media are going crazy. He says the real stories are the booming economy and the likely confirmation of a second Supreme Court nominee. Dale Hurd has more.
The Trump administration and many in the media are trying to figure out the identity of Anonymous, a person claiming to be a senior member of the White House staff, who wrote an op-ed piece portraying the president as a danger to the nation. Published by the New York Times, it describes a president who is impetuous, saying his impulsiveness results in half-baked, ill-informed, and occasionally reckless decisions that have to be walked back. Like-minded colleagues and I have vowed to thwart parts of his agenda and his worst inclinations. Americans should know there are adults in the room. We are trying to do what's right even when Donald Trump won't. President Trump called the writer gutless and blasted the New York Times.
When you tell me about some anonymous source within the administration, probably who's failing and probably here for all the wrong reasons, no. And the New York Times is failing.
Trump later tweeted treason and followed that up with the extraordinary demand that if the gutless anonymous person does indeed exist, the Times must, for national security purposes, turn him/her over to government at once. The newspaper said Wednesday that revealing the person's identity could cost them their job. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham defended President Trump on CNN.
To those who believe that this man is a fool, it's just the people around him that keep us safe, you don't know what you're talking about.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders called on Anonymous to resign. Even the Washington Post, no defender of the president, called the op-ed old news and a PR stunt. It comes on the heels of Bob Woodward's new book, Fear, Trump in the White House, which claims that Chief of Staff John Kelly called the commander-in-chief an idiot and that he's gone off the rails. Kelly responded, calling the book total BS, and Woodward does not name his sources.
Look, he may have hundreds of hours of tapes, but I think most of those probably come from some disgruntled former employees.
Media critic Dan Gaynor said the national news media is all too willing to believe any source that slings dirt on the president.
And of course, Bob Woodward is out there. Bob Woodward has been criticized in the past and now is criticized in the present for basically, fictionalizing stuff here. They've got lots of people in the Trump administration saying it's not true, and it relies on anonymous sources.
So who is anonymous? It could be any one of hundreds of officials, but some believe the pressure will simply be too much to keep their identity a secret, and we may know sooner rather than later. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
We've got to recognize one thing the president has done. We have the strongest economy in decades. We have the lowest unemployment probably ever, the lowest black unemployment ever. We have a booming stock market. It's incredible. The president has rolled back in countless numbers of dangerous regulations that were put in place by the Obama administration. And he's essentially unleashed the economy of this great nation. And to smear a man who's doing this is just ridiculous. We've got a tax cut. We've got all kinds of things going on. And it's remarkable. The average American is much, much better off financially than he was a few years ago. And the optimism in the country is soaring. So to say that this man is some kind of a unhinged idiot is just insane. This man is as good as we've had, and he's making wonderful decisions. And not to mention what he's doing with the courts. He's reshaping the federal judiciary with conservative, I shouldn't say conservative judges, with judges who are true to the Constitution. And the last judge that he put in place has been a superb pick. Judge Kavanaugh is a superb pick. When I look at him in the questioning and to think of his recall, his incredible knowledge of the facts of all these things, it's just simply amazing. And I want to point out, too, the Democrats, this Kamala Harris, is one of the most obnoxious human beings that I have ever seen in public life. Have you ever seen anything like it?
Yeah, well, there seem to be several on the front, but...
Well, I mean, really. But, I mean, they're asking for documents that were produced when he was secretary of the cabinet or whatever in the Bush administration. He wasn't doing policy himself. He was trying to perfect the material is being produced by other members of the administration. And that is all executive privilege. It's the Bush administration executive privilege. And Trump can't lift the executive privilege of the Bush administration. And for the Democrats to demand that, it's just, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's nothing but a stunt. So in other news, Senate Democrats tried to trip up the president's nominee to the Supreme Court during the second day of those confirmation hearings. John Jessup has more on that.
That's right, Pat. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh is back on Capitol Hill after enduring nearly 12 hours of grilling by the Senate Judiciary Committee Wednesday. Democrats have not only been pressing him on potential decisions, some even question his integrity. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson reports.
It was a marathon day for Judge Brett Kavanaugh on day 2 of his confirmation hearing, with senators asking everything from his view on the document debacle.
That's, in my view, a decision for the committee in consultation or discussion with the executive branch.
To what his kids thought of the hearing.
They gave me a big hug and said, "Good job, Daddy."
Judge Kavanaugh, though, worked to keep his part all business.
My personal beliefs are not relevant to how I decide cases.
Senators like Dianne Feinstein, however, wanted to nail him down on hot topics such as abortion and learn exactly what he meant when he called Roe versus Wade settled law.
This is important precedent of the Supreme Court that's been reaffirmed many times.
And Kavanaugh's stance on whether presidents should be protected from criminal investigations.
Can a sitting president be required to respond to a subpoena?
I can't give you an answer on that hypothetical question.
The most contentious questioning came from Senators Patrick Leahy and Dick Durbin. They wanted to know if Judge Kavanaugh knew about emails in the early 2000s that provided Republicans information during the confirmation process of some of President Bush's judicial nominees. Leahy tried to tie Kavanaugh to former Senate aide Manny Miranda, who helped obtain the emails. Senator Lindsey Graham quickly gave Kavanaugh an opportunity to provide a straight answer.
Did you ever knowingly participate in stealing anything from Senator Leahy or any other senator?
No.
Did you ever know that you were dealing with anything that was stolen property?
No.
And Miranda himself provided cover during CBN's Faith Nation when he emailed an exclusive statement to Chief Political Analyst David Brody.
I can confirm that Brett Kavanaugh knew nothing of the source of any information that we obtained, nor did I ever meet with him privately or publicly to discuss it.
Brody says Democrats are trying to twist this into an opportunity to paint Judge Kavanaugh in a negative light.
Republicans will call it character assassination, but this is what you do when you really don't have the goods on a nominee.
Senators will have 20 minutes each today to ask Judge Kavanaugh another round of questions, and Chairman Grassley threatened to go into the weekend if needed to finish this hearing. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abigail. Pat, back to you.
Well, I want to say, I've said it before, the Republicans have the votes, the Democrats don't have anything. It's just a delaying tactic. And the more they continue, the more they're looking ridiculous. Some of these people are running for president. As a matter of fact, half of the Democrats are running for president. It's the biggest field I think I can imagine. They're all trying to go for president. So this thing, Chuck Grassley may well wrap this thing up this weekend. I would hope he does. And they'll take a vote. The vote will clearly, it'll be on party lines, but the Republicans have the majority. It'll be, so Kavanaugh's nomination will be cleared out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. It'll go to the full Senate. And without question, the vote will be there. There may be a few delaying tactics, but Harry Reid, when he was majority leader, killed out what's called a nuclear option. He used it before with Miguel Estrada and others to the circuit courts. And having done so, he opened the doors for the Republicans who took control to run these judges through on a simple majority. There's no longer that 30 vote margin or whatever they're looking for. Just a simple majority will will be sufficient for the advice and consent that's needed under the Constitution. So Kavanaugh's going in. It'll give the president a tremendous boost in his long-term approval rating. And then, of course, a number of other circuit and district court judges are waiting in the wings. They will confirm a large number of those as fast as they can. They'll be on the bench. But the idea is before the Supreme Court gets into its next session, Judge Brett Kavanaugh will be sitting among the justices. John?
Pat, the midterm elections are just 2 months away, and the Trump administration is focused on keeping a keeping a Capitol Hill majority. And part of that strategy involves a busy campaign schedule for both the president and Vice President Pence. CBN's David Brody and Jenna Browder traveled with the VP on Air Force Two and talked about what lies ahead.
Vice President Mike Pence on the road again. Crisscrossing the country, campaigning for Republican candidates in the days leading up to November's midterms. And this time, we're right there with him, on board Air Force Two, heading to Michigan. The Senate candidate he's stumping for, John James, a combat veteran and businessman.
You have been out on the campaign trail, stumping for candidates. Do you think Republicans will keep control of the House and Senate?
I really do. The president and I are very confident that if we get out and tell the story of the progress that we're making in this country, progress that's created nearly 4 million jobs, rebuild our military, has America standing tall in the world again, being respected again. We tell that story all across this country. We're going to make history in 2018. just the way we made history in 2016 by re-electing and expanding Republican majorities on Capitol Hill.
Out of the 35 Senate races, 9 are toss-ups. That's about 25%. In the House, 43 of 435 races are toss-ups, about 10%. In other words, it's going to be close, and history is against them. Typically, the president's party loses seats in his first term.
Part of the reason why we're traveling so much across the country, and the reason why we had an opportunity to talk to some of the great evangelical leaders in the country, is to make sure that the American people know that's the choice.
President Trump echoes that sentiment and ruffled more than a few feathers when he said there would be violence if Democrats take control of Congress. He made the comment at a White House dinner for evangelicals, which Pence was at.
Well, what I heard the president say was that if the Democrats take over the Congress, that their goal is to turn back everything that we've done for the American people.
Well, because he did mention Antifa and some of these leftist groups.
Well, sure.
So what's the concern there about some of these groups?
Well, obviously we condemn any examples of violence on the streets of this country. Zero tolerance for any violence against Americans.
Then when it comes to impeaching the president,
there's a lot of talk about impeachment if Democrats do take control of the House. Do you think Nancy Pelosi is already plotting an impeachment strategy?
Well, they're all talking about it, and so I take them at their word, even though some of them have decided to not talk about that quite so much.
Many Democrats are banking on the Russia investigation and want to make this election about corruption.
We've been fully cooperating with the special counsel since the very beginning. Literally tens of thousands of documents. The White House has cooperated with testimony, and we'll continue to do that. But I just have to tell you, Jen, as I travel around the country, people just aren't talking about it.
One thing that's for sure, the fight over the control of Congress is going to get nasty. And Pence is already feeling some of it personally with a new book out that attacks his faith.
The Bible says, count it all joy when you endure trials of many kinds. And anytime I'm criticized for my belief in Jesus Christ, I just breathe a prayer of praise.
Republicans hope to be able to breathe their own sigh of relief this fall. Of course, they have to fend off the so-called blue wave some are predicting. Aboard Air Force Two, the vice president remains hard at work, determined to not let that happen. Reporting from Air Force Two, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, David and Jenna. Pat, people on both sides of the equation see this as quite a consequential election.
Well, it certainly is. If the Democrats take control of the House, there will be unending investigations. Every committee you can think of will suddenly be forcing the president to release documents and to have the staff members appear for hearings and so forth. It'll be a zoo in Washington. As if it isn't bad enough now, it'll be horrible. Nothing will get done. The American people will be presented with a slaughter. And therefore, keeping control of the House is pretty significant. And to see those House Democrat, at least I should say the House Republicans up for election, the president and vice president do everything they can to see that they hold control of the House. Because as far as an impeachment goes, the Senate is where the decision gets made. You could have an impeachment, but look what happened to Clinton. The House impeached him, but the Senate, they have to get 2/3 vote, and they couldn't get it. And the same thing here, you couldn't impeach this president in a million years. So that's, it's just something that would smear him. Anything they can possibly do to hurt this man, because what he's done is take power away from Washington and give it essentially to the people. And the bureaucrats and the deep state don't like it. And you and I have got to recognize what the game is, that they want to defeat him in everything that he's doing because they hate the fact that they've lost power. That's the game. The power, the control of this nation was in the hands of these people, and it's been taken away from them, and they don't like that.